Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Gorman, and I am with the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. And I would like to welcome everyone to day 2 of the Maryland Child Wellbeing Conference. I'm so happy to see everyone with us this morning. I have just a little bit of housekeeping items before we jump right into our presentations for the day. Again, I ask that you all could please mute yourself during presentations to cut back on feedback and so we can all enjoy the presentations without any interruptions. The mute button is located at the bottom of your screen in the shape of a microphone. At the end of each presentation, you will have an opportunity to unmute yourself to ask questions or provide any comments. And you can also ask questions or comment in the chat box, which is located in the top right hand of your screen. And just as a reminder, today's event will be recorded, and we will post the recording on my office's website and our YouTube page, so be on the lookout for that. I will also be sharing all copies of presentations and contact information if you need those at a later date. So all of that will be coming to you shortly after the event concludes. Before we get started with our first presentation, I would like to just play a video we received from the Lieutenant Governor. So I am going to pull that up right now. And play that for you all.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, welcoming you back to day 2 of the Maryland Child Wellbeing Conference, hosted by the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. The Hogan-Rutherford administration is pleased to offer this collaborative forum to give an opportunity for educators, first responders, and mental health providers to share their experiences, as well as important resources to help young people and one another navigate the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. This conference also offers training and discussion around the important topics of internet crimes against children, the impact of domestic violence on children and the family, and address vicarious trauma. Finally, we are particularly proud of the program called Handle with Care Maryland, a fantastic initiative that helps mitigate the effects experienced by Maryland children when they are exposed to trauma. This year, 16 of Maryland's 24 jurisdictions have adopted the program, and our administration is working for all Maryland public school jurisdictions to adopt Handle with Care by the end of 2021. The support you are providing to children is critical, and it speaks volumes about your dedication to their safety and well-being. I wish you all a productive conference, and I thank you for all your hard work on behalf of Maryland children and families.
Alrighty, we have that. And with that, let's jump right into today's presentations as we have a jam-packed schedule. And I would like to introduce our first presenter, who will be talking to us about children and domestic violence. And that is Tony Korol-Evans, who is a statewide trainer with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. So Tony, I will pass it on over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So as Kelly said, I am Tony Korol-Evans, and I am the statewide trainer at the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. And I want to just talk to you about some of the objectives for today's webinar. We would hope that you would be able to explain how abusers use children to perpetrate intimate partner violence, describe the impact of intimate partner violence on youth, analyze how adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, relates to youth witnessing of IPV, identify best practices to promote resiliency in youth who witness IPV, articulate why children and youth can rebound from witnessing IPV, and discuss the impact of it on teenagers who experience it. We are very grateful to the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, who supported the creation of this training with the VOC grant 2018-0003. So we're going to begin by exploring what IPV is, and I want to let everybody know that I know that for some of you this is going to be a lot of repeat information. You know this, but for some people it might be baseline. So I'm going to go through some stuff more quickly than others, but please feel free if you have any questions to put them in chat, and then Kelly will let me know when there's a question, and she can stop me and I can hopefully respond to that. I'd like this to be more interactive, so if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So when we talk about intimate partner violence, I'm sure you've probably seen the power and control wheel before. Domestic violence is a pattern of behavior. Okay, that's the first part of it. It's not something that happens once. It is a pattern in which one person attempts to control or intimidate another partner through threats or actual use of physical violence, sexual assault, verbal, psychological, and or economic abuse. So it does not require there to be physical violence. It doesn't require there to be sexual assault. Verbal, psychological, and economic abuse do. But what we're talking about today, of course, is using children. And this is actually part of the power and control wheel, because the use of children is something that perpetrators can do in order to better control or keep control over their victims. And I apologize, the language on here is very gendered. It is female victim and male perpetrator based, this power and control wheel, but we realize that that is not always the case, that intimate partner violence can happen to men, and that also can happen within same-sex relationships. So please understand that, although the language in here may not be gender neutral, that, that it's using that, but that it can apply to anybody. So making them feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass the victim, threatening to take the children away, are all forms of intimate partner violence. We actually just had a webinar on Tuesday that MNADV produced with somebody from Mothers Against Drunk Driving about using drunk driving, using impaired driving and to endanger the child as a way of controlling the victim. So there are just many, many different ways that children can be used in order to control. So then, of course, children are also experiencing this. They're seeing what's happening to the parent who's the victim. Approximately 2/3 of non-fatal intimate partner victimizations of women occur in the home. So it occurs where the children are, it's where they're at, it's in their very own house, right? So you have 67% of these victimizations happening at home. There's a very high likelihood that kids are going to see this see this happen, right? And nearly half of mothers on a survey experiencing IPV self-reported that their children had witnessed it. So 44% reported themselves that they knew their children had witnessed them experiencing, some sort of verbal or physical or psychological abuse. So they know that their kids are seeing it. And then what's another really frightening statistic in terms of how it affects children is that children exposed to maternal IPV were 40% more likely than their peers to have behavioral problems. So you see that growth in behavioral issues if they've experienced their mother experiencing IPV, if they've watched it, if they've heard it, right? So this is all really an issue, especially when we know the statistics around intimate partner violence across the country and here in Maryland specifically. We have, a number of homicides every year. And, last year in Maryland alone, there were 23 victims who were actually killed as part of intimate partner violence. And in the last 2 years, we had even children who were killed as part of intimate partner violence. So we need to always be aware that those are the worst case scenarios. But there are so many people that everything is leading up to that, and the children are experiencing that as well. So I'm going to go on now to the next section about what happens when youth are exposed to intimate partner violence. And we're going to talk about 4 things. Why does intimate partner violence affect youth? A continuum of exposure, the effects of exposure, and then the ACEs, the adverse child experiences, and how that plays out over time for children who see intimate partner violence within their home. So the first thing I want to tell you is I like people who are way smarter than me. I really appreciate learning from people, and the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child is so much smarter than I am when it comes to the science of brain architecture. So I want to play this because this explains how our brains are built, and it'll help me to explain why things are going on in children's brains.
Hey, Tony, it's Kelly. It looks like we can see the video, but we can't hear it.
Oh. I have volume up on my end. Is there something that you have to do to optimize volume on your end? My apologies. I usually work with Zoom, and there's a specific button that you have to check. My apologies, everyone. So I'm not as familiar with this technology.
I'm not 100% sure on my end. Let's see. Someone suggested taking off your headphones and using the regular speaker. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so we'll try this, and if not, we'll move on.
All right. I have taken off my headphones, and we will try hitting play again and see if that works. Now I have moved into a different thing, so let me.
While connections that are used less
Can
you hear it now?
process.
Yes.
Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay, so I just want to recap the beginning part of that you might have missed, which is when they're talking about the neurons and how they're built, that the neurons are making these synaptic connections at the very beginning, and the ones that are reinforced, the connections that are done over and over again, build really strong connections, and the other ones through what's called pruning fall away. So it's kind of like if you use that part of your brain and you build those connections build and become stronger. And if you don't use it, then those connections fall off. This is one of the reasons why they say children acquire language, because they don't learn it when they're young. It's why young children can learn so many languages if they're taught when they're really young, because they're not actually learning, they're acquiring them because their synaptic paths are being built. It's also why we lose language if we don't use it. If anybody here studied a language in high school and you remember that you got an A in French or German or Spanish or whatever you took, and you knew it then, but now if anybody asked you to do something more than order off of a menu, you probably couldn't come up with a full sentence. That's because you're not using it. And through pruning, our brains remove those synaptic transitions, right? So before we go on, I just want to make sure that that makes sense, and see if there's any questions about that.
Tony, before you move on, is there a way to take your presentation out of speaker mode?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I put that in there because I was trying to.
Yes, there we go. Perfect.
There we go. Sorry.
Thank you.
So the thing with the exposure is that the more that kids are exposed to IPV, the more that they see that, the more that they're going to have those synaptic pathways strengthened. And that means that they're going to experience this trauma because those things are happening. And children are exposed to IPV in many different ways. Of course, they see it and they hear it, right? So they see the victim, the parent victim, being hit, or they hear the parent victim being screamed at, right? So they experience it through those two senses, which impacts the brain. They may also feel it. They may feel the tension between their parents, which is very real. They may also become victims themselves, because that is not uncommon for children who are in a household where one parent is abusing the other, for the parent to also abuse the child. They may smell it. There may be certain things. If somebody when the abuser is getting agitated and is getting into one of the modes where they're going to be abusive, if they suddenly start chain smoking, or if they start drinking a lot and they smell the alcohol, or they smell the smoke, or they smell this, these are all things that can wind up being triggers later in life for them that may have, no understanding. It could be that the smell of dinner cooking itself, if there was a certain smell that the abuser didn't like when the victim was cooking dinner, that smell could trigger somebody for years if they smelled it in a restaurant or something. And of course, they can taste it. One of the things that abusers will do is they will give their children alcohol. They will, use alcohol as a controlling factor with the victim. And it is something that, children will react to for years. So they are experiencing this through every single sense. And when every sense is feeding information into the brain like that, it is forming all of these really strong connective synaptic pathways, which are saying to you, this is dangerous, this is violent, this is all of these things. And it's causing all of the reactions that you're going to see. There's also a continuum of exposure to be aware of. Not all children who are exposed to IPV are going to experience the worst symptoms. If you look at this triangle, the number of children who experience things at the bottom level is greater. The number of children who experience things at the top level, severity, is higher. So at the bottom level, more children will experience partner conflict, arguing, and yelling. Less children will experience controlling behavior, threats, intimidation, and destruction of property in the relationship of the parents. Even less children will experience seeing their parents be physically assaulted, threatened with weapons, and with threats of suicide or homicide. And a smaller amount of children will experience seeing a parent receive fatal injuries or fatal assaults or a serious injury. So the number, with the severity of violence, the number reduces. So not all children who experience IPV are experiencing it in the same way. There's all of these different levels. And so the different levels also control their reactions to it and their experience of it. A child who experiences their parents arguing may not have any kind of negative reaction. They may just realize that it is part of a natural conflict. If they experience their parents screaming at each other and name calling and things like that, that could have much more of an effect. It also is the difference between a one-time argument over something that happened as opposed to every single night this is happening. So it's a matter of not only the severity of the violence, but how often it can occur. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go back to that one. So effects on the youth who witness intimate partner violence. There are two different types of effects. There's the internalized and the externalized. So the internalized effects are those things which they're feeling inside, right? Anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, parentification, perfectionism, shame, somatic complaints, and withdrawal. So these are things like, I think you recognize anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Parentification is when inside they feel like they have to be the parent. They have to be the adult in the relationship because the parent victim doesn't have that capability. They feel like they have to be perfect in order to avoid their parent being abused. They feel shame for not being able to do anything. They have trouble sleeping and they will withdraw. So they internalize those things. What you see externally, and I spoke specifically about parentification, are things like accidental injuries, acting out in noncompliance, aggression, alcohol or drug abuse, delinquency, impulsivity, running away, and truancy and school problems. And so with those things, those are the ways that those internalized feelings are going to manifest themselves in ways that people might see who are out in the community. So these are things that their doctor or their teacher or somebody else might notice. And so it's all because they're dealing with all of the things that somebody who is experiencing IPV is dealing with. If you look at those internalized things, except for parentification, those are all things that the victim of the IPV likely was feeling. And when you look at the externalized things, you see that this acting out, noncompliance, aggression, delinquency, impulsivity, running away, truancy, and school problems, those are all things that are specific to the child. So even though a lot of the internalized things can be the same between the person who is experiencing the violence firsthand and the person who is witnessing it, the way that children externalize it, they have a lot of different ways that they externalize it from the way that the victim themselves would. So how negatively are children affected by exposure to intimate partner violence? Well, it depends. Like I said, it depends on the severity. It also depends on how often something happens. Frequency and severity and the proximity to events, the continuum of exposure that I talked about earlier, right? So that is one of the things that tells how negatively a child may be affected by exposure to IPV. The proximity to the event. Are they kind of on the outside looking in? Do the parents kind of try to hide it from them? Or are they right in the middle of it, trying to break up the fight, getting in between the parents when they're screaming and arguing, maybe trying to intervene if there's physical violence? That also is going to have an impact on how negatively the child is affected. The closer they are to the violence, the more severely they're going to be affected. Age and developmental stage at which the exposure begins. The earlier the child is exposed to the victimization, the greater the negative impacts. So somebody who's exposed to seeing their parent be victimized starting when they're a toddler is going to experience more severe impacts than somebody who's exposed when they're, say, a middle schooler, or somebody who's exposed when, say, they're in high school. So we need to be aware that age and developmental stage, because as you're older, you have better coping skills. And the more coping skills that you have, the better you can deal with it. But when you don't have any coping skills, and anybody here who has ever had a toddler will know that the coping skills of a toddler are somewhat minimal. Toddlers want what they want when they want it. And everything is now and everything is immediate. And they don't have the ability to rationalize or to do complex thinking. And so they're at this developmental stage where all those synaptic processes are happening, and that's just being reinforced over time. Multiple forms of violence, child abuse, community violence, and exposure to IPV also will help to decide whether a child is more or less negatively impacted. Is this the only type of violence that they're exposed to, as watching a parent be abused? It's bad enough on its own, but are they also being abused? Do they live in a community where there is violence? Are they experiencing any of the other things on the ACEs questionnaire, right? So when we look at this, there are so many things on the ACEs questionnaire that lead into a child's experience of IPV that will affect them later on. So this is the basic questionnaire for adverse childhood experiences. And when you look at what I've highlighted here, did the parent or other adult swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you feel afraid or might be physically hurt? Well, if you're watching your parent be physically hurt, you're probably going to be afraid that you could be physically hurt. Did they often push, grab, or throw something at you, ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Well, we know that children who are in households where the parent is experiencing IPV are also at higher risk for IPV themselves, for being, for child abuse. So we have to take that into account. Did you ever feel, number 4, that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Well, if a parent is experiencing intimate partner violence, then yeah, you're probably going to answer yes to that. Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? If that eventually led to separation or divorce. Was your mother or stepmother, and again, this is very gendered language, often pushed or grabbed, sometimes or often kicked or bitten, ever repeatedly hit? You're going to answer yes to that. Did you live with anyone who's a problem alcoholic? Maybe the person was or not, but was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? We know that intimate partner violence leads to depression in the victims, and that also there are, suicidal ideation, there's thoughts of suicide among that. And so we have to realize that they may have experienced that. And then, did a household member go to prison? So if the perpetrator eventually winds up in prison, that also has a negative impact. So even if what somebody might consider to be justice is served, and I say that with, quotes, justice being served, it is an adverse childhood experience. So when you look at this from a few incidents of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're talking about 7 ACEs that this person would check off with if they were physically hurt. If they were not physically hurt, it's still 6. And that is a lot. That is a very high ACEs score. So why is this so important? Why is ACEs important when we're talking about the effects on children who witness intimate partner violence? And so this is from the CDC, and the mechanism by which adverse childhood experiences influence health and well-being throughout the lifespan. You start out with generational embodiment and historical trauma. Some children are just born into that. They're born into families of generational violence, and they're born into families where perhaps there's historical trauma. Social conditions and local context. That's the community in which somebody lives. That's the social world in which we live. Then you add on the adverse childhood experiences, like watching a parent experience abuse, which leads to disrupted neurodevelopment. So now the neurodevelopment that you're supposed to be developing as a toddler and as a child, that is supposed to be helping you with all of the things you're going to do as an adult, is disrupted because instead your brain is developing paths that tell you, this is what I need to do to stay safe. This is what I need to do to keep mommy from being hit. This is what I need to do in order to not wind up getting hurt. This is what I need to do in order for this to happen. So rather than your neurodevelopment being focused on positive things and the things that you can do going forward in your life, it's being focused on survival and on the absolute most basic things, and also on a fear reaction. So that leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. You're not learning what you should be learning in school because of everything that's going on. Also might be that you're in a school that isn't the best school because you're already in an area that doesn't have the best schools. Your emotional ability to grow has been impaired because you've been experiencing all of this violence. And your idea of social situations is completely skewed. And your idea of what relationships should be is completely skewed because all you've ever seen is your parents who are in a relationship in which violence is a part of the relationship. And so if that's normalized for you and you think that's the way it is, that goes back to the bottom of generational embodiment and the whole process starts over. Well, what this leads to is adoption of health risk behavior. And that leads to disease, disability, and social problems, and that leads to early death. And so we see that people with ACEs have all of these issues going on, and that one thing leads to another. And again, as I said, I really like people that are smarter than I am. And this is Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She is the first Surgeon General ever of the state of California. And she's going to explain in the way that a doctor would explain, I'm a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, a little bit more about ACEs to help you understand the effects here.
The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC. And together, they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transmitted.
So I think that she does an amazing job of explaining the science behind why ACEs are so important to understanding the way that children will react and the way that the effects are going to happen to children and why those effects are happening to children and youth who experience IPV, witnessing IPV in their homes. So we're going to go on from here and talk about resilience a bit, but I did want to take a moment and stop and ask if there were any questions. Kelly, was there anything in the chat box or anything anybody wanted to say?
Not yet.
Okay. So again, please feel free to put questions in the chat box, and otherwise I'm going to go ahead and keep going, but Kelly, also feel free to stop me if anything comes up.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We just had one question pop up.
Okay.
Do you know of any studies that link ACEs, IPV, and teen pregnancy rates?
Well, we're going to talk about that. I'm so glad you asked. I don't know if there is a specific study on that, but I know that ACEs are related to teens who become involved in intimate partner violence relationships themselves, which often can include reproductive coercion. And so when we actually talk about teen dating violence, which is the second part of this presentation, I will talk about that. So that is a great question. And I'm not sure if there's any specific studies that have looked at how all three are linked, but I'll see if I can find out. And I'm just curious, how many people do we have in watching the webinar right now?
We currently have 125.
Okay, so if you look at this, if you look at 125 people sitting in here right now, right? that means that there are at least 15 people who are watching this statistically who likely have 4 or more ACEs. At least 15 people right now who have 4 or more ACEs who are watching the webinar as we speak. And if you look at, you know, the 2/3 number, you're talking about 42 people who have experienced at least 1 ACE. So there's people who are probably listening to this who probably understand this on a very visceral level. And I want you to know that if you need to take a moment, breathe, that's all good. Because when you look at the statistics, that's the numbers. There's 15 people likely sitting, listening to this at least, who have experienced 4 or more ACEs and who may be experiencing some of these adverse effects as adults. And I will look into finding the studies that on ACEs, IPV, and teen pregnancy and see if there's anything specifically linking all of that.
And we had one more question for you before you continue, and that is, when talking about ACEs, what age range are you referring to specifically?
ACEs are anybody under the age of 18. So it was any child. It can happen to any child in the house. So it's from birth to 17.
Okay, and then one more question popped up. Do you have any information about how successful therapy intervention can be helping these children?
Yes. And that's what we're about to go into. So that's perfect. And the answer to that is therapy and intervention is crucial to helping these children. And it can be very successful. And that's what we're going to talk about, resilience. So how resilient are our children? It depends on the presence or absence of the following: loving and supportive parents, opportunities for healing and success. There's your therapy portion, right? A supportive community. And then what's over on the right, the child's individual temperament and innate resources. Sense of optimism, self-agency, personality, problem-solving skills, self-regulation, spirituality, future goal setting. Now, some of those things are somewhat locked in, and others of those things can be changed. And so when you're working with children, you want to work on the things that can be changed, right? So you want to work on helping them with things like self-regulation, self-agency, problem-solving skills. And so that is where we get to, you know, these types of things where you can help them to learn how to go forward, because self-regulation, problem-solving skills, future goal setting lead to other things. So therapy helps children learn to rewire their brains, okay? So self-regulation tools and games, deep breathing. It's a basic, it's something we do with adults, it's something we do. Drumming circles are considered to be something that's very helpful for self-regulation if you're doing group things. Playing flashlight tag. So you take a flashlight, and instead of tag where the danger could be of somebody being pushed or shoved, but everybody's given a flashlight and the leader shines a flashlight on the wall, and the children have to try to catch the light with their flashlights. And that way there's a lesser chance of aggression. Popping bubbles, but only with one hand, and then changing up the hands as they go. It helps them to learn to self-regulate. Who remembers playing red light, green light when they were a kid? I know that I do. Of course, I'm old enough to remember when the time that you had to come inside was when the street lights came on. So for those of you who are old enough to remember that and lived in an area where that was a thing, but red light, green light is if you say green light, people can move towards you. If you say red light, they have to stop. And if you turn around and you see them moving, they have to go back to the beginning. So again, it's one of these things. It's a game, but it helps promote regulation. It helps children to learn the right rules. Simon Says. Very simple game. And there's a game called Zip, Zap, Zop, where it helps kids learn to differentiate between sounds very specifically, and they have to follow a pattern, and they have to send, it's like sending energy across a circle. So you send zip, sends it to one person, that person says zap to another person, that person says zop to another person, and they kind of point to that person across the circle. And it's another thing that helps regulate self-control and tools and games. So why do these promote self-regulation? Put some answers in the chat. Why do you think these things promote self-regulation? I know it's early.
One person said reminds people that they are safe.
Right. These are safe games. They're safe ways to play. And it helps you to develop kind of relationships.
We have co-regulation. They offer connection. Your brain is controlling your actions. Reminds people that they are in control. Requires concentration. Focus on thought process. Calms the automatic system. Non-competitive. A bunch are coming in now.
Well, I love it. Once you guys get going, you really get going. And those are all things that help promote self-regulation. And for these kids, that is so important because all they've seen modeled is somebody who is not self-regulating, right? They've seen an abuser who is controlling somebody by what looks completely out of control, which is violence, right? So for them to learn these self-regulation tools is so, so important. So what are some ways that we help to teach problem solving? Because once we teach children to self-regulate, okay, playing games, then how do we help to teach them problem solving skills? How do we help to teach them that, you know, hitting somebody is not the answer if you didn't like your dinner, right? What are the ways to help teach problem solving? Go ahead and put some answers in the chat.
We have role playing, modeling.
My role-playing people, you are near and dear to my heart. I believe very strongly, and especially somebody was asking about therapy and what you can do. Role-playing can be so important because for these kids and the modeling, they have not seen problem-solving skills modeled. They have not seen healthy relationships modeled. And so role-playing those problem-solving skills, you know, giving them a difficult, you know, giving them a question and saying, you know, this is the scenario, what would you do? Or if the child comes to you and because if they were sent to you, let's say because they acted out, they did something inappropriate, saying, all right, this is what you did in this instance. But if this were to happen again, what are some other things? And allow them to brainstorm, right? Allow them to start making those reconnections of positive synaptic processes. And this is important because this goes to goals and beyond. Self-regulation plus problem-solving skills equals the ability to set future goals. If they cannot self-regulate and they cannot have problem-solving skills, their ability to set future goals and meet them is going to be severely inhibited. And meeting goals allows them to attain self-agency, which then allows them to have a sense of optimism, which is something that a lot of children in these homes don't have. They don't have any optimism. They don't have any hope because what they've seen has been so horrible. So you start with the self-regulation and problem-solving skills. Then you help them to be able to set goals. And then when they start to meet those goals, and you want to make those goals, you know, SMART goals, simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And then it helps them attain that self-agency, the I can do it, and that sense of optimism going forward. And the reason this is possible is because we can rewire our brains. For years, they did not think this was possible, but now we know that's not true.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So I know that I have had some bad habits in my life. I was a smoker, and I smoked for 20 years. And then I got pregnant with my child and I quit smoking. So I rewired my brain. Anybody who has ever tried to quit smoking, who has been a smoker, knows that that is not an easy thing to do, but it is possible. And now the mere thought of having a cigarette to me is stomach turning. It just isn't, and I was not a casual smoker. I was a fairly heavy smoker for 20 years. And now I haven't smoked in over 20 years. So, it is possible. If you've ever lost weight, if you've ever gone on a exercise regimen, if you've ever learned a new skill, like you decided, I don't know, because you've been locked in your house for 3 months, that you're going to take up crochet or embroidery, or I don't know, make your own self-starting yeast for baking bread, which is kind of the thing with COVID. You've learned a new skill. You've rewired part of your brain. We've been doing a lot of rewiring in the last 6 months. And not only can we do that, but our children have had to do that. And children can do that. And they actually have more time to do it and it's easier for them the younger that they are. So the sooner that we can get intervention, the sooner that we can help them start rewiring their brains, and the sooner that they can start experiencing positive outcomes. And that's where therapy and intervention and, everything through school, counselors, home, whatever, all of those things have to come together. And because the more that it's reinforced, the more accurate that neural pathway is going to become, and the more likely that the old pathway is going to fall away. So before we move on to this next section on teen dating violence, I just wanted to see if there were any questions on that, because we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit. Nope. Okay. We will move on. There'll be time for questions at the end. So when we talk about teen dating violence, the statistics are not good. 1 in 3 teen girls is a victim of physical, emotional, or verbal dating abuse. That, to me, is a terrifying statistic. I look at that and I'm like, looking at my son, my daughter is now almost 34, so she's well past that. My son is 24, and I look at all of his friends who are girls, And I know this to be true because of the things they've told me, just because of the work I do where they feel comfortable talking to me and they feel comfortable talking to him and telling him. This is a terrifying statistic. And, you know, for everybody who is sitting here listening to this, who has a daughter who is 18 or not yet 18, I'm sure it's a really terrifying statistic. Nearly 1 in 10 high school students has been physically harmed by a dating partner. Now, this study was not gendered. This is not saying 1 in 10 girls or 1 in 10. This is 1 in 10 students overall. So it could be her, or it could be him, could be that 1 in 10, or it could be them. And here we get to that question about the relationship between intimate partner violence and witnessing intimate partner violence, teenagers, and pregnancy. 25% of teens with histories of abusive relationships said their partner tried to get them pregnant against their will. So they used reproductive coercion in some form, stealthing, the removing of a condom without the permission of the person, throwing out their pills, hiding their pills, in some cases, actual sexual assault. And we also know that teens who have witnessed intimate partner violence, who have high ACEs scores, are more likely to get into abusive relationships themselves. So you can see that connection and that through line. And IPV begins early. Among adult victims of rape, domestic violence, or stalking, 22% of females and 15% of males experienced their first instance of intimate partner violence between the ages of 11 and 17. Let me say that again, between the ages of 11 and 17. Half of the female victims, and over a third of the male victims were between 18 and 24 when they were first abused. So when you put those numbers together, that means that almost 75% of females were abused before they were 24 years old, and nearly 50% of males. And that is just something that is unconscionable and something that we have to work to stop. Because if we don't start intervention early, we're too late. IPV begins early. We have to start interventions early. And part of that is responding early to children who have witnessed IPV in their homes. And part of it is education about dating violence. Again, 11 to 17. My granddaughter is 8. She's 3 years away from that low number. I can't see how any parent or grandparent can see that and not just be sick to their stomach. And then teens experience significant barriers to accessing help. So here are some of the things that they have problems with. They confuse sex with love. They have confusion about their legal rights. They don't want to be forbidden from seeing their partner. The danger may be underestimated by the school. Boys will be boys, girls will be girls, kids will be kids. They have a distrust of adults. They fear they won't be believed or they'll be blamed. They have a fear about lack of confidentiality, mandated reporting, parental consent, and fear of losing popularity if they break up with the abuser. Now, that one, fear they won't be believed or will be blamed, that is common among all people who experience IPV. That's not just related to teens. But things like this, confusing sex with love, that's something that we think of more with teenagers, right? They don't want to be forbidden from seeing their partner or their distrust of adults. Again, something fairly unique for teens, right? The danger of being underestimated by the school or the fear of losing popularity if they break up with the abuser. Again, that peer pressure and and school being something that is in their lives that adults, largely aren't experiencing. But then what's left when you take all of those out? Confusion about their legal rights and fear about lack of confidentiality, mandated reporting, and parental consent laws. And this is where teens really find these barriers, because even if they know about services, they may not access them because they're afraid that somebody will have to tell their parent and they don't want their parent to know. They're afraid that they don't have any rights because they're not 18 years old and they don't even know enough to know to call and ask the question. That was only page 1 of the barriers. There's a whole nother second page that's really important to understand. And again, some of these are similar to what adults will experience. Friends and family members think well of the abuser. We know abusers can be very charming, right? Abusers can, and to people, to the rest of the universe, they seem like Prince Charming. Many adults lack knowledge about the resources. They don't know where to turn. So if they don't know where to turn, how are teens going to know where to turn? Pressure from the parents to have a boyfriend or girlfriend. I say that because adults, it might be the pressure from the family not to seek a divorce or a separation, not to break up with the abuser, or being turned away by their friends or family if they choose to break up or they tell them about what happened. The other thing is, these are where the differences are. Their first sexual experience or new experience of being in love, they may not know what is normal, especially if they've witnessed IPV in their home. They may think that this is perfectly part of a normal experience of being in love. This just happens. They may go to the same school, have the same classes with the abuser, and they may be experiencing this peer pressure to keep dating somebody. Lack of finances and transportation. Adults can sometimes have this problem too, absolutely. But for teens, this is a very, very real problem. They think they don't have any way of getting to services, and they certainly couldn't afford them if they got there. At least that's what they think. But here's the big one. Some service providers may not serve minors. And if they do, they may feel that they are obligated to tell their parents, or they may be mandated to tell them. Now, all of that depends. The laws differ from state to state. And in Maryland, you have to know very specifically the laws. You have to know whether you're a mandated reporter. Of course, you know, the joke in Maryland is basically if you're over 18 and you breathe, you're a mandated reporter, unless you fall into a specific category that's not. But what you have to report is very specific, and the laws are different for sexual abuse as opposed to physical abuse, so you have to know the laws. And for some service providers, they're absolutely not able to serve minors, and they're not able to serve minors without telling the parents. So that can be a real issue. Another thing that teens face is abusers' use of technology as another form of control. And adults face this as well. But among the teenagers, I mean, this is the generation that was literally born with a cell phone in their hands, right? I mean, it's like it's connected to them. It's part of their body. I mean, and they don't use it to talk. That's the other thing. I mean, they rarely, you know, it's all text. I mean, talking on the phone is becoming something of a lost art among this generation. But they will answer the phone for the abuser if they tell them to. And 1 in 4 teens experienced harassment from a current or former dating partner through phone or text. 1 in 4. Over 1/3 reported that their partner had checked up on them 10, 20, or 30 times per day via their cell phone. And almost 1/3 reported that their partner used email or text to check up on them 10, 20, or 30 times per hour. And for some teenagers, this may seem like, oh, this person really cares about me. They really love me. They're really paying attention to me. This is all wonderful. But this is not wonderful. This is control, and it's abusive. So what can we do? Focus on 2 things, prevention and response. We have to explain healthy relationships. Listen, listen, listen. If they're talking to you, listen to what they have to say. Monitor their technology. Remain calm. It's hard. It's really hard to remain calm if you hear that your child is being abused or somebody that you're working with, and to hear the stories, but we have to. We have to remember not to judge, that their decisions were made, and we need to validate their feelings as being real. Telling somebody they're not really in love is not going to help you be able to respond to them. And it's not going to help you be able to prevent them. If you say, oh, that's not really love, you're only 15, you couldn't actually be in love. That is not going to help. How do we respond? The teen dating violence has many different looks. It ranges from the control of 20, 30, 40 text checkups in an hour to physical and sexual violence. We want to build on the teen's own strengths. We want to be able to connect them to health services if it's necessary. And we need to know who we can connect them to safely. We need to be able to explain their legal options or know who we can send them to learn their legal options. One of my favorite sayings is, I'm not a lawyer, but I know a lot of them and I can send you to them. We need to individualize their approach. Teens are not one size fits all. They are unique. This generation is extremely unique. You cannot just put on one, there is no one size fits all approach for dealing with this. And we want to maintain confidentiality and disclose the limits of that confidentiality up front. Let them know, if you tell me this, I will have to do this. Don't wait and drop it on them later, because then you will lose them completely. If you tell them ahead of time, they may back off initially, but they're much more likely to continue if you're honest with them. They hate hypocrites and they hate being lied to. So, wrapping up. We have some upcoming trainings at MNADV, and this PowerPoint I shared it with Kelly, and it can be shared with you, along with some handouts about the ACEs test and the continuum, ACEs continuum I've sent to Kelly so she can share it with you, or you can email me directly if you need it. Also, so the PowerPoint will have all these trainings. These are all on our website. And I wanted to take a minute to see if there were any questions. And I think, Kelly, I brought this in on time.
Yes, just about. And I will say, in the interest of time, I will encourage participants to submit questions through the chat box. And Tony, please feel free to interact through the chat and respond to any questions or comments. And we'll just move forward with our presentations for the day, if that's okay.
That's great.
Yep.
Also, I just want to let you know my information is here. Please feel free to copy it down. Email is the best way to reach me because I'm only in the office sporadically at best right now. And I am going to drop the evaluation link into the chat box. It's really important to fill out that evaluation because wonderful people like the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services like to know how we're doing on our training. So please fill that out. And I say thank you very much.
Yes, a huge thank you to you, Tony. It was a great presentation. And just to reiterate what you had said before, I will be sure to share your presentation with your email and all of the handouts that you had sent me. So don't worry about that. I will get that out to all of the attendees today.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we will move on to our next presentation, which is focusing on addressing vicarious trauma. And I would love to introduce Ruby Nelson, who is the director of the Child Advocacy Center of Prince George's County. And so I will pass it on over to you, Ruby.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So we're going to jump right in and get started. So let's see here. Okay, can you see that screen?
Here's to you.
No, we cannot. So when you hit present now, you make sure your PowerPoint is already open and you can select a window and you should be able to click it from there.
Okay, here we go. How about now?
Here's to you.
Yeah,
Trying
we
to
can hear it, but we can't see it.
You take on the weight of.
I didn't hear you.
we can hear it, but we can't see it.
And I'm not sure why, because to present now, okay, let's open up my entire screen. How about that? And then we'll share it. Can you see it now?
We cannot.
I'm not sure what's going on because it's being shared.
Let's see. I know, and we did this yesterday and it worked fine.
Yeah. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Present now. Entire screen. Share. It's open. And can you see it?
No.
Not sure what's going on here.
Here's to you, trying to make
Let me try something else.
Try when you hit present now, try clicking a window instead of your entire screen.
Okay, so let's back out here. Present now, a window.
And you should be able to click specifically which one. There we go.
Yay.
Yep, we are good on this end.
to you, trying to make the world a better place. You take on the weight of it all, knowing there will be a cost, but never expecting to pay full retail for it. After a while, you notice something's getting to you. You're changing. You've been there. We've all been there. The answers just aren't all that easy anymore. Now you're too drained for even the smallest demands. You're numb. You feel like you can't do enough, and you've needed
Okay.
better place. You take on the weight of it all, knowing there will be a cost, but never expecting to pay full retail for it. After a while, you notice something's getting to you. You're changing. You've been there. We've all been there. The answers just aren't all that easy anymore. Now you're too drained for even the smallest demands. You're numb. You feel like you can't do enough, and you've needed a nap since before the turn of the century. Maybe you're a school teacher, a public defender, or a member of the military. So why does the world feel like a different place to you? Maybe you're an ecologist, a doctor, a community organizer, or a caretaker to family members. It's all piling on, and some of your own choices could be starting to raise eyebrows. Let's face it, these days, when the world comes calling, you'd really rather not pick up. Your mind, blown. Your spirit, broken. And your body is not taking any of this all that well. Something's just not how you remember. And that something could, in fact, be you. Hey, it's a struggle. We understand that. Doesn't mean it's too late for a change. We're here. We get it. And we have ideas for how to find a better way. Check us out. TraumaStewardship.com.
Good morning and welcome to Vicarious Trauma, Organizational Culture in You, its impact and the path to resiliency. I'm Dr. Ruby Nelson. I'm currently the Prince George's County Child Advocacy Center Director. I have a keen interest in strategies to address vicarious trauma because, as you can imagine, at a Child Advocacy Center, we hear more than our fair share of victims telling us about their trauma events. I'm sure there are times that our staff feel like some of the people in the cartoon clips you just viewed. Give me a thumbs up if you've ever felt like a person in one of the cartoon clips. Okay, I see quite a few people have been in that same space. So you're in the right place. I believe everything that you take your time and spend your day doing should have objectives. So my aim for this webinar are to achieve the following learning objectives. I want to make sure you understand the impact of vicarious trauma. I want to make sure you recognize what the risk factors are and who they can affect. I want to be able to identify strategies that you can utilize to address vicarious trauma for your staff, for yourself, and for your organization. And I want to give you some strategies for building resiliencies for your organization and individuals. Okay, vicarious trauma is a topic that's been researched and discussed for quite a number of years. So I want to make sure we're all starting with the same understanding as far as the terminology and definition. So we're going to be looking at burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and resiliency. So let's start with burnout. I'm sure many of us has probably said, I feel burnt out. My job is really getting to me. But what does that really mean? The definition of burnout is emotional and mental, physical exhaustion, where there's always more work than there is time. This can create stress when we believe we must get all this work done and we know in our hearts that there's just not enough time. Burnout can happen to anyone when you have low job satisfaction, you feel powerless to change anything, or you feel overwhelmed. Burnout can make helping professionals more susceptible to compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. As you can see, some of the signs for burnout are depression, frequent illnesses, sleeplessness, and irritability with your family, your friends, and coworkers. So it changes you as a person. According to the Office of Victims of Crime, OVC, compassion fatigue is a combination of physical, emotional, and spiritual depletion that's associated with caring for others who are in significant emotional pain and physical distress. Think about that. It's the gradual erosion of our hope, our empathy, and our compassion for the clients we serve and for ourselves. Helping professionals who are burnt out and fatigued are more susceptible to compassion fatigue. The researcher Charles Figley called compassion fatigue the disorder that affects those that do their work well. Now that's a reward for doing your work well. The impact of compassion fatigue can increase or decrease with each passing day. We're not doing anything wrong because we develop compassion fatigue. It's because we care. So let's see what it looks like. Compassion fatigue has many signs and symptoms. You have physical signs such as headaches or getting sick more often. There are also behavioral signs such as anger, increased use of drugs and alcohol. There are psychological signs such as depression, cynicism, and resentment. These are just a few of the signs and symptoms. As you can see, some are very similar to burnout. A difference between burnout and compassion fatigue is burnout can happen to anyone. It could be the secretary, it could be the doorman, it could be the clerk. Compassion fatigue happens to helping professionals who care, and it impacts their ability to be empathetic. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is the natural consequences of behaviors and emotion that results from knowing about traumatizing events that have been experienced by another. As I said, I work in a child advocacy center, so we hear a lot about the trauma that children experience at the hands of adults. Vicarious trauma is the transformation of self in a trauma worker or a helper that results from empathic engagement with traumatized clients and their reports of traumatic experience. Vicarious trauma is the ongoing process of change over time that results from witnessing or hearing about another person's suffering and need. When you identify with the pain of people who have endured terrible things, you bring their grief, their fears, their anger, and despair into your own awareness and experience. It's like you have experienced those same things. Vicarious trauma focuses on the cognitive schema of the core beliefs and the ways that it changes you. It causes a change in how the helping professionals see themselves, their clients, and the world. This is an occupational challenge for people working and volunteering with victims who are continuously exposed to trauma and violence. Dr. Shalane in 1973 described having nightmares, being unable to sleep or to talk normally to people after he was treating a number of combat veterans. So that's when the first symptoms of vicarious trauma were identified. But the term vicarious trauma was first used by Perlman and Savat when working with survivors of childhood sexual abuse. It is often said to be the cost of caring. This is an occupational hazard for helping professionals who work with trauma survivors. Since this is the work we do, we must be prepared to take care of ourselves. You may have heard the terms secondary traumatic stress, secondary trauma, countertransference, or burnout. People use these terms interchangeably, but with vicarious trauma, you now know the difference. So you will hear them used often. So let's take a poll. While working in this field, I believe I've experienced burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma. So vote C, B, or V, any of those three. And I can't see the chat box, so Kelly, can you tell me what the results are, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of C and V. A good combination of all of it.
Okay. And that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. And sometimes you will see people with all three, which is absolutely possible. So now that we know what vicarious trauma is, these are the individuals that vicarious trauma can affect. And by this is no means an exhaustive list of those. If you are in a profession where you work with victims who experience trauma, you can become vicariously traumatized. It is not if you will be vicarious trauma, it is when you may have some degree of vicarious trauma. But there are some risk factors that make helping professionals more vulnerable. So it's something that we have to begin to prepare ourselves for just in case, because we can have varying degrees of vicarious trauma. There are certain risk factors that individuals have that make us more susceptible to vicarious trauma. These risk factors include helping professionals who have experienced childhood trauma. They're more susceptible to vicarious trauma. A helping professional's individual coping style can be affected by vicarious trauma. So depending on how you cope, what your style of coping is, it can impact how you may experience vicarious trauma. If you're dealing with one's own life circumstances that can be difficult because we are individuals too, and we have things that's going on in our lives, this can contribute to the onset of vicarious trauma. If you work in a toxic work environment with poor or non-supportive working conditions, this can also contribute to vicarious trauma. And we start thinking about our workloads, how much work we may have and the time we have may not have to do it, or the shortage of staff. These are all factors that can contribute to vicarious trauma. When you're excessively empathetic with the helping profession where you blur the lines between professional boundaries, you can be at risk for vicarious trauma. Remember, vicarious trauma impacts us at different times and at different degrees in our lives. In your work environment, sometimes you feel fulfilled with what you're doing and are real happy to come to work. And at other times, you feel depleted and unfulfilled. Vicarious trauma is the same thing. It's not an all or nothing type thing. Vicarious trauma can impact every aspect of your being. So let's look at what it could look like. In the physical, in your personal life, you could have headaches, fatigue, rapid breathing, or rapid pulse. Psychologically, there's numbness. You feel powerless, anxiety, and you're disillusioned about life and about where you are in life. Behaviorally, there's sleep changes. You may isolate from family and friends. You may start using more substances and your appetites may change, either eating more or eating less. Spiritually, you start questioning the meaning of life. You start questioning your purpose, or you may even lose what your purpose was. You want to know or question good versus evil. Where does that all stand? Cognitively, you may feel hopeless. You may be preoccupied with your clients where you're always thinking about what you can do or how you can help a client. Cynicism. And you may begin to experience traumatic images that you see when you don't want to see, or you think about them when you don't want to think about it. And relationally, you may become withdrawn, or you may become excessively clingy, become mistrustful, and you lose lack of interest in things you once enjoyed, such as sex or hobbies or exercise. And you start losing your contact with your close friends. This is a tool that I used to have my staff do at least every 6 months. It's available free on the internet. It's called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. And it's an assessment tool that will help evaluate where you are as far as your compassion satisfaction and your compassion fatigue. You can take this as a 30-question scale where you just rate it from often, never to very often, and then it's very easy to score. And I always recommend that people take it at least twice a year so they can have a baseline as to where they're starting, and they can see changes as they occur. So you can use this tool ongoing, and it's free. So we've talked about the impact of vicarious trauma on individuals. How does that impact organizations? Well, we know that organizations are made up of individuals. So what happens to the individual eventually is going to carry over to the organization. So in various agencies, it impacts the performance. You may see a decrease in the quality and quantity of the workload. You may see low motivation, or you may see work that's hardly getting done. As far as morale in the organization, you see apathy. You see negative attitudes. You do see a decreased interest in the work. People that once enjoyed what they're doing seem to have no interest at all in doing it anymore. Behaviorally, you may see people that are overworking, that just never leave the job. They're always there. They don't want to take time off. They're just always doing the work. You may see people starting to drag in and be tardy all the time. You may see poor follow through. People that once were always on top of the game now have poor follow through. And interpersonally, they may become detached or withdrawn from their coworkers, and there's more poor communication. There's a lot of conflict because people aren't talking to each other anymore. Vicarious trauma, a vicariously trauma-informed organization recognizes the challenges and addresses them through policies, procedures, practices, and programs. So in the feedback box, type some ways that your organization may be addressing vicarious trauma or how they may suffer. And again, Kelly, could you give me that feedback, please?
Of course.
Other ways organizations may suffer from vicarious trauma. What else might an organization see?
We have turnover.
Mm-hmm.
Sick days, lack of production, decrease in empathy, increase in the use of leave.
Yes. all signs that an organization needs to look at what's going on within their agency or organization and their staff. Okay. We don't want to wait till it gets so bad that everybody's running out the door because the organization itself is toxic or sick. So what are some strategies? We know this is part of our trade. We're helping professionals. We know that this could lead to vicarious trauma. It's the cost of caring. It's the work that we do. So as an organization, we need to put some strategies in place. And even though it can impact individuals and organizations, there are strategies that can assist you in addressing it. Some of these strategies include providing adequate supervision, building trusting so that you can build trusting relationships between your supervisors and your employees. You have to acknowledge, as a supervisor, you have to acknowledge the negative effect that this trauma work causes on an individual. And we've got to be flexible and accessible. Peer support. We want those coworkers to be able to talk to each other and support each other on the job because they're all in it together. They're all experiencing the same type of work, maybe not in the same type of way. So we want to build those relationships within a job by offering opportunities where they get to talk with each other and do various activities. Education and training. We as supervisors or as managers, we need to be educated and trained, but our staff, everybody from the front security guard to the top of the agency needs to be trained about various vicarious trauma and the impact that it has. But not only on vicarious trauma, they need to offer opportunities so that people can go to things they have to take, but also things that they want to take. So it gives them a chance to explore different options. Work-life balance. We have to make it okay to not work 24 hours by sending emails at 11 and 12 o'clock at night, and employees feel that they should have to answer these because my supervisor sent me an email at 10 o'clock at night, I'm supposed to respond. So we've got to be able to model the behavior we want our staff to do. So you've got to have a work-life balance. Making a safe place for staff. Some people don't share what's going on with them because they feel like it makes them weak. So they don't feel safe. So we want to create an environment that is a safe place for staff to be able to come, share, talk, and get positive reinforcement or feedback. Emotional support. Sometimes staff just wants people to listen. They don't want you to do anything. They just want to be able to talk with you and share what's going on and not necessarily look for an answer. So providing that emotional support that a staff may need. Workload and expectations. We've got to have reasonable workloads, and I know that's not always possible, particularly when you're working in child welfare because the cases don't come in because someone got too many. But we want to make sure that we're at least trying to balance it so that one employee doesn't always get the worst cases of what comes in the door, but there's some type of balance. So there's a variety of different cases that they may get for each case that they're working with. But as an agency, we have an obligation, we have an ethical obligation to be able to address vicarious trauma within our agency or organizations. So, thinking about your agency, and I'm not sure where everybody's from, your current capacity to address vicarious trauma within your agency, is it good? Is it adequate? Does it need improvement, or you don't know? Type A, B, C, or D in the feedback box and give us some idea where your agency stands. Because what we want are helping professionals and agencies that are resilient.
I'm seeing a mix of everything, but some C's.
Okay.
And D's, yeah, a good mix of all of them.
Okay, great. So there's always room for improvement. Even those that are good, we can continue to reinforce those good policies, good practices, good procedures, and build on those. Those that need improvement, there's ways to go up so that you can get to that good. So there's a constant way, and we're going to talk about some of those now. So what I said, we want agencies and staff that are resilient. So what is resiliency? It's knowing how to overcome adversity from trauma, from stress. It's this process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. We want our staff to be able to bounce back, because the job that we're in, we're going to hear about trauma. We're going to have stress with the cases coming in the door, but we want to give them the tools and the skills and the environment, the policies and the practices so that they can bounce back. That's our overall goal as an agency or organization, is to be good to our staff, because our staff can then be good for us. So one of the things I found very interesting is the Office of Victims of Crime has developed 5 core elements of resiliency. And we're going to briefly explore these and how they can help an organization build a trauma-informed, resilient organization. Okay. So the 5 core elements of resiliency are personal perspective and meaning, a sense of hope, healthy coping, strong relationship, self-knowledge, and insight. Okay. Each of these core elements has 3 components. Utilizing these core elements and the 3 components can help agencies and organizations build a strategic plan to build resiliency and address vicarious trauma. So let's start with personal perspective and meaning. Personal perspective and meaning is how you see life and how you engage in life. The components are morality and integrity, and that's knowing right from wrong, spirituality, coherent meaning, life meaning. So let's just examine one of those components. If we look at it, is integrity, your actions and belief, are they consistent with your moral code? And a lot of times we have to look at whether what we're doing as far as our work and the agencies in which we work with, is there balance? Is there agreement between what the agency wants, what I believe, and then do the 2 match? If we look at spirituality, then we're looking at our connection with the divine. Whatever that divine is for you, whatever spiritual realm that you choose to express that in, that's what it means for you. And when we look at coherent life meaning, we have a personal understanding of what my why is. What is my purpose? And what is the meaning of the world to me? That's a personal thing, because it's my personal perspective. Why am I doing this work? And what is its purpose as far as what it means to me? And for each one of your staff or your agencies, it's going to be something different. There may be similarities, but there are always going to be a lot of variance. A sense of hope is the next core element. Its components are a sense of humor, the ability to have fun, and optimism. When we look at a sense of humor, if we look at it, it helps us reframe a problem. So that it could be one of the worst situations. If we can kind of reframe it so that it doesn't weigh as heavily on us, that helps us be resilient. With optimism, we're expecting that good things are going to happen. Even though it may be bad right now, we know that things are going to get better. The sense of hope is no matter what obstacles we encounter, we know that things are going to improve. So some of the things that we do at our agency is we have framed quotes around the building. Everywhere you look up, whether it's in the bathroom, whether it's in the bathroom stalls, we have positive motivational quotes that remind us why we do this work and what it is we're trying to accomplish. So throughout their buildings, you'll see signs of hope that it's going to get better. What are some of the things that you do, or what are some of the things that you can do? In your chat box, could you enter a couple of those things? We also want to have reminders of hope. We may have a hope box or pictures on our computers, our screensavers, that gives us hope, that brings joy in our life. Are there other responses, Kelly?
We have small treats for staff with positive notes, plans in our offices.
Okay, those are all good ideas, things that can kind of motivate your staff and keep them in the moment and remind them why they're doing this work, because we want to give them a sense of hope that things are going to get better. Even though we may have 90 cases in the door now, tomorrow we may not have none, but we want to keep giving them that sense of hope. The element healthy coping is knowing how to take care of yourself, both with your work and at home. The components are commitment to the truth, which is being able to acknowledge that this work impacts us. This work affects us. Some of the things we sometimes can't shake off. We've got to acknowledge that and accept that. Empathic attunement is to accurately understand another person's cognitive, behavioral, and their feelings. We've got to be able to see that our colleague is having a hard day today. How might I be able to assist her, or what could I give her to kind of help her get over this? And intentional practice with our policies, our procedures, and our practices and resources. We want to intentionally put things in place to address vicarious trauma. One of the things that we do that I thought was really fun with my agency is they have organized sports league. We have a team, a kickball team that's really good. They were a champion for a number of years, and people get engaged in that process, either playing on the team, scorekeeping, or just coming out to cheer the team on. And that helps as far as that team building, that healthy coping, because we're outside, we're playing, we're running, we're laughing, we're joking. So it brings all those things together, and it helps us with communication. So we see people outside of what they do and gives us other things that we can kind of feed on. Strong relationships. How we connect with others can build the element of strong relationships. The components are attachment to others. We have to understand that it's a human need to belong, to have those connections. And we do the same thing at our jobs. We have to have those connections at our jobs, because nobody can do this job or do this work by themselves. Being able to seek support, recognizing that one, you need support, and two, that because of the policies, practices, and procedures that's been put in place at your agencies, support is available for you. But you've got to be willing to seek it. And then two, giving support. Being willing to help other people, even though they may not ask for the support, but just being able to recognize that empathic attunement, that my colleague needs help, she's overwhelmed. Is there something that I can do to help her? Or can I point in a direction where she can get help? Even when they don't ask, but being available either as a resource or support for that person to do that. What we find is helpful, and it seems like we do a lot of things around food, is chat and choose, where staff just may bring lunch together and we'll sit and eat and talk about nothing sometimes, just what's going on in the world, or potluck lunches or celebrations, where we all bring in our favorite dishes and kind of enjoy. And this was all before the pandemic, so a lot of that has changed and we don't have those things in place yet. But just being able to connect even through the pandemic through Zoom, a lot of people have started utilizing their iPads so that we could actually see people because our computers don't have cameras on them. But that gives us a connection. It's a whole new world as to how we're attacking some of these things now that we're still in the process of developing and determining how it's going to work. So what are some things that you all are doing that are helping you to build strong relationships at your agencies? Or what are some things you want to do if you're not doing them currently? Nobody's doing anything?
Hi, this is Tracy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Tracy. And yeah, you can unmute yourself. Got to say that. Go ahead, Tracy.
So one of the things we're doing is doing virtual award ceremonies and virtual, like we did lose someone recently and we did a virtual memorial service. So that was powerful. So using Microsoft Teams to do just video connections to do award ceremonies and honor people.
That's a great idea. That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? And please feel free to unmute yourself.
Ruby, we had a couple come in on the chat, and it was talking about having a walking program, going outside, a self-care week, giving genuine compliments, virtual game nights, supportive staff meetings.
Great, all great ideas. There's another thing that we're doing, and it can be done virtually, or we have a bulletin board where we're putting up kudos for folks. So if someone gets their LCSWC licensure, there's a kudos put up, or someone has a child or a graduation, there's a kudos put up about what is going on with people within our agency and staff, so that we can kind of congratulate those folks and let them know that we're aware of it and are happy for them. Self-knowledge and insight is the last element. And the components are self-esteem, knowing who you are and what you stand for. A sense of control is recognizing what you can and cannot control. And independence, feeling confident to act freely and not rely on others to decide for you, so that you can decide for yourself. These are very important, particularly the sense of control. A lot of time there are things that are out of our control, and we've got to be able, as employees or staff, to recognize that that's something that I don't control, so I'm not going to stress myself over it. But I should know, based on our policies, practices, and resources, where I can go to at least express a concern or an idea as to how it could be addressed if it continues to be an issue or something positive. Your self-esteem as a person is knowing who you are and what you stand for. There are some things that you're just not going to do as a person, irregardless to whether your agency or a supervisor asks you to do it, and you have a reason for it. So just understanding who you are as a person. This is very important. We ask, one of the ways we kind of address it is we try to engage as many staff members as possible in various committees and works, task force, so that they have those opportunities to have a sense of control, to have independence, so that they can help have an input into developing our policies and procedures that may impact them or may impact the programs that they're in. So it's very important to kind of engage people in the process so that they feel they have a sense of control, that they have some say in what's going on with them. So in closing, if you want more information, because I've just kind of briefly skimmed the 5 core elements and organizational resiliency model, I would suggest that you go to www.ovc.ojp.gov, and they have an entire course on the 5 core elements. So those elements are important, and it helps you to start to put together a strategic plan in reference to how you can improve and build resiliency for your agency as well as for yourself, with working within the helping professionals. In closing, as an organization, we owe it to our staff to put policies and practices in place to help build resiliency and normalize vicarious trauma. As I said, it's not something that may happen, it's something that will happen in varying degree to different individuals at different times. And we as an agency, as employees, as supervisors, have to know how to address it. 1, by recognizing it, 2, knowing what some of the symptoms are, and 3, being able to have a plan to address it so that when it occurs, we're not kind of surprised by it, and normalizing it. In the long run, it will be beneficial to the agency and to staff if we have a plan in place, a strategic plan to address these issues within our agencies and our staff. Any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. Okay, hearing none. These are some of the references that I used in pulling together this presentation, along with personal insight and information resources that I utilize. I'm available if you have any questions after this seminar at ruby.nelson@maryland.gov. Thank you so much for attending it, and I hope you got some information. I know most of this information you've probably heard in some form or fashion somewhere, because as I stated, vicarious trauma has been around a long time, and there's been a lot of information available for it. And what I try to do is pull it together so that you would have a resource to start developing your strategic plan for your agency or for you as an individual. Thank you so much for participating. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ruby. This was great. I did get a comment asking if this presentation will be available. And Ruby, if you just send that on over to me, I'll be sure to share that with everyone.
I will.
And your email address if anyone has further questions or comments.
I will definitely do that. And I thank you again, Kelly, for all your assistance.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And with that, we will move on to our final presentation for today and for our conference, wrapping things up. And I would like to introduce our next speakers, Kelly Cox and Andy Smith. Kelly is with the Carroll County State's Attorney's Office, and Andy is with 270 Net. And they will be providing a demonstration of an app that they created. And so I'll let them tell you all about it. And so Kelly and Andy, I will hand it on over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. I'm just going to first start by giving you a little bit of my background, as well as how the project itself became into development. First off, my name is Kelly Cox. I'm with the Carroll County State's Attorney's Office. I've been here a very long time, almost 30 years, since 1994. I've held several positions within the office, which also include the Victim Witness Unit, working with victims as an advocate throughout the years, and then on through my current position, which is Operations and IT, which is comprised of a vast collection of duties and special projects. Included in those special projects are the updating and implementation of the main state's attorney's case file system, not once but twice, because Y2K was our first venture, and then in 2015 it was our second venture. Our website, and then the transition to Maryland electronic courts. And I'm bringing this up so that you understand how this project came to fruition and how the evolution path we're choosing to take for future enhancements, which is going to work in conjunction with our case file system. How we got here. It was basically my boss, who is State's Attorney Brian DeLeonardo. He's also the president of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association. He brought together a few key people in our office to brainstorm on a way to make sure that the newly adopted Handle with Care initiative that was being sent out to the state of Maryland was met within Carroll County, and to also take advantage of this opportunity to assist in some of the challenges that our law enforcement officers have had while in the field by not having certain resources and contact information at their fingertips. One of those being notification to the schools designated the Handle with Care contacts for on-site demand versus having to wait several hours before getting back to the barrack or their individual agencies, and at that point then sending an email or a phone call or whatever method at that time they were using. After brainstorming, it was decided that the best way to achieve that goal was to create a mobile application, as this is a world of technology, and in Carroll County, all of our officers currently have a cell phone assigned to them. Brian felt very, very strongly that we focus on the Handle with Care first and foremost. He also wanted to create a mobile application that could be used throughout the state of Maryland for other jurisdictions and communities if they chose to maybe take on that same app and customize it a little bit to their own communities. Our goal was to have stage 1 tested and released by July of 2020. Unfortunately, our test release was scheduled for the second week of March, and as we all know, COVID decided to present itself. We're looking very forward to having most of our testing completed and released to our officers right after the first of the year. The app that we are going to present to you today is being created in stages, with the most crucial information being created first, which is, again, what you're currently going to get a little show and tell on. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to elaborate on some of the planned enhancements that Carroll County is planning on doing. One of those, which we are just very excited about, which is a GPS school locator, so that an officer could be on site, and instead of having to guess what school this person goes to or whatever, especially in certain areas, there could be numerous elementary schools within a certain location. So working with the Board of Ed to get a GPS locator. And of course, on the court side, we are looking forward to having it link up with our case file system so that we can send out call-off notifications directly to our officers. So with that in mind, I would like to now introduce you to Andy Smith. He is with 270 Technologies. He is the project manager that our team here at the State's Attorney's Office has been working with. And again, as he presents this app, he is going to stop at certain areas and ask if there are any questions. So with that being said, I'm going to direct you guys over to Andy Smith, who is going to actually do the presentation of the mobile app.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for that introduction. Can everyone see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm very happy to be able to present to you all this morning. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Andy Smith. I'm a project manager with 270 Net Technologies, located in Frederick, Maryland. I'll be walking you through our Handle with Care app that we developed with the State's Attorney's Office, Carroll County. And just a quick introduction to myself and my company. 270 Net has been around for about 20 years, and we specialize in mobile and web application development for federal and local governments, as well as for education, nonprofit, and commercial entities. In a moment, I will share my screen with you. I'm actually talking on my iPad, and I will show you this application that we are launching. Just as a quick overview, there are two main sections. The first is the Handle with Care section, and then after I show you that, there will be a QA time, and then there's several other screens that were developed, as Kelly mentioned, to support law enforcement officials with their paperwork and just helping them find vital information. So I'm going to open the app now. Let me.
This is Kelly. As you get your screen sharing all set up, we just had one comment / question come in asking for you, as you're going through the presentation, if you can just touch on privacy.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Absolutely. Let me just make sure I can share my screen and that's working. Okay.
Kelly, while Andy is getting that set up, you had mentioned that you wanted us to touch on privacy. Are you specifically talking about the privacy of the information that is inputted, or are you talking about a different type of privacy?
The question was, can you speak to how privacy is addressed through the app? So I'm thinking maybe a little bit of both.
I'm not finding him in your contacts. Who would you like to call?
Okay, so what we'll do is, as we're doing that presentation, Andy is probably the best one on the technical side to answer that question for you. I do know that we have all of the information that is being stored obviously it's going to be on an encrypted security site. Everybody's information is going to, obviously be stored differently based on your county and what your county's preferences are.
Right. And then I will say, Andy, before you really start getting in the crux of things, to all of the attendees today, since we're looking at a demo in screen sharing, if you could all just turn off your cameras, that will help make sure there's not a delay when Andy is clicking through the app.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes. So I should mention that this application works with Apple and Android phones and tablets. And what you're looking at here is the home screen of the app. It would live on your phone or tablet, just like any other app with an icon that you click to open. Handle with Care provides schools with a heads up when a child has been identified at the scene of a traumatic event. So if Billy or Susie didn't complete their homework or were falling asleep in class, etc., this can understand the situation and can handle that child with care. So let's say an officer has just finished assisting at the scene of a traumatic event, perhaps a fire at a home where a child was present. And through this app, the officer can quickly record the child's information. So I click on the Handle with Care button at the very top. And right off the bat, you can see that I have the option to past history of my Handle with Care reports or add a new event. And I'm going to add new event. Okay. All right. So you can see that this is the data entry screen. The app pre-filled the date and time to the current date and time. These are editable. So if I was reporting an event that took place in the past, I wasn't able to record it immediately, I have the option to go back and report something that's in the past. But the app will try to save the officer time by pre-filling date and time. Then the officer adds name and other vital information about a child that they've gathered, such as age, as far as they know. And Kelly has helped pre-fill all of the elementary, middle, and high schools, public schools within her county. So that's a nice pick list. And then you can add an address. City, state, county, and so forth. And when the officer has entered this information, go ahead.
Excuse me, and I'm going to interject here, just so that everybody else that's out there. Currently, Andy is manually inputting that information, but down the road, our goal is to have that GPS locator so that some of this will automatically pre-fill with that GPS locator.
That's absolutely correct. Again, it's all about trying to find ways to to save officers time on paperwork and so forth. So if we can, anything we can fill that officer can edit, if it's a correct yes, then we're all about it. So I'm going to fill in the information, and I'm going to add child. I'm sorry, I'm going to click I'm going to click save and send, right? So once I've saved and sent that report, this is where the app really does impressive work. Once I've hit save and send, the report is automatically sent to the Handle with Care contacts and or officials who have identified need this information. A copy is also sent to the officer as well. Everything is tracked. There's no more work for the officer to fill out, and everyone who needs to know has already been contacted through the app. Now I'm going to open the view history. I'm going to reopen Handle with Care, click View History. And here is a list of all of the Handle with Care reports that or the using officer of the app has submitted. You can review here the date and time and all the child's information. You can also see when there's multiple children listed on the Handle with Care report. They're listed like this. And I'll show you how you can add multiple children. Add them during the initial reporting process, or you can add them after the fact. So for in this example, I'm going to add a second child to this report here. Again, the app pre-fills the last name and the school and all of the city and location information from the original report, trying to save the officer time. Let's say that Jane went to a different school. So using the school picker, I can schools. And I save and send. So that's really the overview of the Handle with Care section. Again, it's all about saving time and paperwork. The officer using this app, really once they hit save and send, their job is done and a copy of everything is automatically sent to everyone who needs to be aware of that. Kelly, did you want to do Q&A here?
Andy, we actually had a question come in the chat box, and it says, does any agency with access to the app have to complete an MOU or a BAA? Is there a template version which can be shared with attendees?
So great question. So this app is not a universal app that everyone would use the same app. This app is for Carroll County, but what we would do is provide a customized version for any interested counties or jurisdictions. So we would be able to customize it for their needs. Does that answer the question?
Yes. And then will you just touch on, is there an MOU that has to be signed?
No, they're not.
Kelly, currently the way we are rolling out this application is we have, as the state's attorney's office, as the owner of the application, we have on the back end side the ability to accept or not accept a applicant. And at any time, if an officer was to leave their agency, at that point, we would make him inactive. There is a whole back end of this, which an administrator takes care of, which Andy will go into as far as how we get our users and how that's all maintained. So I think some of that will be answered when we get a little bit further into Andy doing his show and tell.
Okay, great. Then Andy, I will give it over back to you. And as a reminder, anyone can take themselves off of mute if they have a question.
Yes, absolutely. And as Kelly touched on, so there is the app is managed through a back-end website, administrative website that Kelly and her team manages. So all the data and information that is displayed in the app, Kelly and her team can manage that. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's other sections to the website or the app that are not directly related to Handle with Care, but they're more focused on efficiency and information for officers in the field. So the next section that I'm going to show you is needed for court. Officers always need to be aware of when and where they need to be in court, and this app puts that information in a single place that's easy to reference. Currently, each of these buttons here, District Court, Circuit Court, and Juvenile Court, they go to a list that Kelly's team posts on the website every day. So for instance, here's the district court call-out form that Kelly has posted for today. This is how Carroll County decided to set it up and handle call-off lists. One of the potential future upgrades that we've discussed is actually presenting a dynamic calendar here that shows each court date for the unique officer. That's certainly possible down the road. So again, just wanted to point out that this is a customizable app, and different counties and jurisdictions can customize it to fit their own unique procedures. This is just how Carroll County wanted to use it. Next, we have the contact a prosecutor section. Let's say an officer is at the scene and has questions for prosecutor. Here we provide quick, scrollable list of contacts. You've got your special victims unit, your economic crimes unit, deputy state's attorney, after hours duty attorney, and so forth. This is a searchable list, and each of these contacts is clicked all. So if I click on after hours duty attorney, the pop-up comes up. If I hit call, we'd be calling Ed right now through my phone or iPad. There's also an agency tab here, and you can create contact lists that are specific to your specific agency. All right. And next we have legal updates. Legal updates is a scrollable list of important legal information. The state's attorney's office has the ability to enter this information in their admin website, and then with a click of the button, send a push notification through the app that updates all the officers at once. And here is where the officers can view those information. This can be links to internal notes within the app, or it can also be web pages or PDFs. So this here is a searchable PDF of important information and legal document. It's a quick reference. Important resources. This is related. Let's say an officer is in the field and needs to quickly look up a contact for victim services or a website for criminal injuries compensation board, etc. These resources are all listed here. They're searchable, and they're also filterable by agency again. So here you have your victim information and notification link, as well as many other websites and important PDFs. Then we have contact the state's attorney. So this link is the idea that our state's attorney, Brian, had added as a way for officers to privately contact him directly. This form sends Brian an email directly that sends a copy to the officer and is not saved anywhere else. It's not logged in the admin website. It's just a to provide a quick and personal one-to-one contact between the officers and the state's attorney. You would just type in your subject and type in the body, hit send, and the email goes directly to Brian. The last button is simply a link to the Carroll County State's Attorney's Office website. Again, just for quick reference. And there's Brian. So that's really the app. I want to mention again that you can manage the app and all the users and information through a back-end administrative website. There's on that admin website, such as user management. It's role-based, so there's different roles and permissions. There's a dashboard screen that shows important data, such as chronological lists of all the handle with care submissions all in one place.
from the admin site. You can also download data and export it to Excel for easy data mining and reporting. So it does, if you reports related to Handle with Care or other information that you'd be collecting in the app, that feature would potentially really help you with your data mining and your reporting. It's also where you would administer agencies, schools, users, and so forth. So there's really a lot of potential here that could be added in the future. We're continuing to develop this with Carroll County. We'd love to help develop a version of this with you and your counties. We can really create any sort of dashboard that you can imagine, and a lot of it can be automated. And then I guess I should add, Kelly touched on this a little bit, some future enhancements include GIS location mapping, off-call scheduling, and even more dashboard reports. So thank you. That's really it for me. Would be happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Andy and Kelly. There is a question from Lisa in the chat box, and she is asking, I'm a counselor for CCPS. Would I receive a Handle with Care notice through the app, or would my admin?
So you would receive
currently,
I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Andy, go ahead.
You would receive the notice through an email currently. Was that what you were going to say, Kelly?
What I was going to say is that in Carroll County, we have an email address that goes out to a team of people. So in our situation, it's an email, and that is how we have it set up. Is that an email will go out to whatever, in this case, our school system provided us with the email address that they prefer. It could be more than one, I'm sure. It could be whatever you choose to customize it to. It just happens to be in Carroll County, there is a group of teen counselors that receive it, and then they shoot that information out to the individual schools.
Yes, so I think to address this question and probably some others is everything would be really customizable for your county and how you want to set it up and what email specifically you want to be inputted and things like that.
Correct. And I just want to make it known that this app that we created, it was created and brainstormed by Brian, our state's attorney. He's also the president of the Maryland State Attorneys Association. And from very early on, when we came up with this idea and we reached out to 270 Technologies, the whole plan from day one was not to keep this to ourselves. The plan was to get this out there to as many people as possible, to adopt it so that Handle with Care information really could be handled in a manner that was very quick and easy, and make sure that nothing fell and hopefully nothing falls, in the loop somewhere between officers being out on the road and then having to come back hours later, and or sometimes where they're on one scene and then immediately have to go to another. So Brian really had communicated with several folks at the governor's office to make sure that when we create this app, we made sure that we had some of the back end so that other counties could customize and adopt in that way.
Okay, let me see. There was a question in the chat box saying, I am assuming that if other counties use the app, they will need to do a procurement with the vendor, ?
Yes, so we have a PowerPoint slide presentation that goes along hand in hand with this presentation. That will be available to you all. It has all information that we covered today, including screenshot of the backend admin website. And it has contact information and some ballpark numbers as if your jurisdiction did want to get their own version of this app.
That's great. And I'll be sure to share that with all of the participants here.
Hi, my name is Ayana. I actually am a school social worker at in Frederick County, and we currently have a paper copy of this. So I'm assuming this app replaces the paper copy.
It's actually funny that you brought that up because one of the agencies that we actually were first going to test with, which is Mount Airy, which actually has both Frederick and Carroll. And that was one of the things that came up is that currently Frederick County, they have a paper. So one of the tabs that Andy shared with you under Contact the Prosecutor was also an agency tab. So what we are working on stage 2 is if a particular agency has something similar to a form, and that is your preferred method, that form would be available to them on this site and only to them because it would be permission driven based on that agency's needs. And at that time, they could fill out the paper and send it via email. However, I'm assuming when different counties adopt this, I would like to think that they would involve their Board of Education and come up with what works best for them and their teams.
Right, because I'm looking at this and this is great because a lot of times, like someone mentioned, the police officers get off shift and by the time our SRO comes to school, it might be a couple of days after he has been notified about the handle with care. So I feel like there's like a lag for us. And so from the first presentation that we heard yesterday, it's like the teachers need to know ASAP. I need to know, admin needs to know as soon as possible before the kids return to school. And so I'm looking at this app and I'm thinking, wow, that's like almost, instantaneously that we'll be notified.
Absolutely. That's the point.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And Ayana, I want to thank you for just bringing that up too, because as I'm the statewide handle with care coordinator, and so something that I am always encouraging to our jurisdictions is kind of thinking outside the box in these terms. And we're really trying to automate this process and make it as easy as possible for the agencies and partners involved. And so that's why I was really excited to have Kelly and Andy come on and give you this demo of what they've created to hopefully, kind of inspire or spark some conversations of interest or whatever it may be, to just really see that it is possible for us to implement something like this and still be successful within the Handle with Care program.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
And just to reiterate, I know that when our state's attorney got together with the Board of Education, this was our prime reason for doing this mobile app, was the Handle with Care. However, we needed to make it enticing for a law enforcement officer to actually use it. So by putting all these other resources and all these other items at an officer's fingertips, it pretty much opens up more of an excitement on the law enforcement side for just, instead of just going out for one item, there's more of an excitement or more of a, I don't know the right word, but they have more of a need to actually use the app. So we're hoping that across the board in Carroll County, once it's adopted, that all law enforcement agencies actively use it, and therefore that same issue that you had mentioned, which is the main reason why we were creating this, is that very same thing. Officers are on the scene. They don't always have the ability to run to their cars and or get onto a laptop of any kind and make that notification right then and there before either getting off shift and accidentally forgetting or getting right put into another scene. So having it right then and there while they're working on their reports, while they're doing everything right there, to have it at the touch of their hands. And that is the main goal, is to try to get the information to the schools as soon as possible so that these kids can be treated with care.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Remembering to unmute yourself if you do.
Well, I guess if there's no more questions, Andy, again, and myself, thank you guys very much for listening and letting us show you this application that we're actually very excited to hopefully get to using. Unfortunately, COVID kind of got in the way, and we're really excited to get back to the project. If anybody should need anything, I know that Kelly is going to be sending our presentation out to everybody, and both of our contact numbers are on that presentation.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Andy and Kelly. It was a great demo, and I'm so happy we were everything was working and we got to see it also. That was really great. And with that, we are ending a good bit early today, and that concludes our Child Wellbeing Conference. And so I just want to extend a huge thank you to all of our speakers from today and yesterday, and to everyone who attended yesterday and today, all of our attendees and participants. Again, I will be following up with all presentations, links to videos. The recordings from yesterday and today will be posted, and you all will get notified when those are available. And so I thank you all again. Please enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, and I'm sure we will all be in touch at some point soon. So thank you, everyone.